Hey there. So today I am doing a video heavily inspired by Stephanie Canada's videos. If you haven't seen her stuff, I will link her channel down below. She's hilarious. But I am comparing a reproduction pattern to its original vintage pattern. If you don't know, a lot of the reproduction patterns are not actually based on the actual vintage pattern. It's what they think the vintage pattern might have looked like, or they've updated it for modern times. So they tend to not fit the same. And so I am curious how these two will compare. When shopping for true vintage patterns, I almost always get a size 13, which is a bust 32. And then this one is a waist of 26.5. So that will pretty much fit me perfectly. This one. So if we go by here, I'm supposed to be somewhere between an 8 and a 10 in the bust. My bust is actually smaller than a 32, so I'm gonna say an 8. But my waist at 26.5 is supposed to be a size 12. This pattern only goes up to a size 12. I am tiny. I don't think that's right. So what I've decided to do is I'm going to take this shorts pattern and compare it to this one and see which one matches in size closest, and just do it that way because I don't trust them. After comparing the two, it looks like a size 12 is the closest match. I'm really trepidatious about this. Let's see how it goes. Ooh, the back looks closer to a size 10 in the waist. Maybe I'll do a size 10. This can't be like the least size inclusive pattern ever, can it? Whew. Well, the front curve is so different, it's hard to compare the two, but it's somewhere between a 6 and an 8. So I guess I'll go with the 8. Okay, now that we've finished with all the sizing issues, let's actually get into cutting. I am making both of these patterns out of a cotton poplin. The vintage pattern will be this floral poplin, and then the reproduction pattern will be the solid navy. I'm going to try to compare the instructions the best that I can. Of course, the reproduction pattern assumes that the person using it does not know how to sew. So it gives you instructions like stay stitching and interfacing, which the original pattern skips over because in theory, back in the 40s, they knew how to do that. As you can see, the darts at the back of the reproduction pattern are quite a bit larger than those in the vintage pattern. The instructions for the top are pretty much exactly the same. Sew up the dart, sew up the side seams and the shoulder seams, sew them together, turn them out, you know, all the same. Day 2. Last night I finished the 2 tops. I have thoughts, but I will save them till later. So far the instructions have been okay. The instructions on the repro pattern are just so wordy. I feel like they are doing a disservice to sewers who have never sewed before by just being so wordy and confusing. I'm confused and I know what they're asking me to do. This is like split out into the 3 steps. This one is in paragraph form, and it just is a lot of extra wording that I don't feel like needs to be on there. Like, I'd much rather have them tell me how much I need to press up the hem instead of pressing under the 1/4 inch seam allowance. I don't know. I just feel like the wording's just strange, and it's that way for every single step. So today I need to get the skirts and the shorts done. I don't know if I'll be able to have time to do both. I don't foresee them being super difficult, but it is like 10 o'clock. So just looking ahead for the shorts, you can use a slide fastener, or they have a button opening instructions. I should probably just do the zipper for both. I don't know. Just because this one only has a zipper. It's probably easier. Ugh. I just realized I don't have zippers. So I'm gonna need to go get some zippers. Hopefully Joann's has them. Zippers obtained. They only had 4 of them. Thank goodness I only needed 4 of them. Step 1 of the shorts is the same on both, which is to just sew up this center front seam here. Of course, you have the extra step of sewing on the sides of the front for the vintage one since it's in 2 pieces. Let's do it. Okay, so we have our first slight deviation from the instructions. The repro instructions have you just fold the pleat in half and then stitch along the line, press it towards the middle, and top stitch it on the outside. The vintage instructions have you press the pleat and then bring the other line to meet it. So basically it's already pressed towards the center, and then you baste it on the outside all the way down and then top stitch it. I don't know which one's better. I guess we'll find out. So here is where the directions kind of veer in different directions. The vintage pattern has you sew up the side seams first and then add the pocket. And then the reproduction has you add the pocket first. Again, I'm going to just see which one's better and I will report back. Shorts are almost done. The waistband instructions were pretty similar, except this time the reproduction instructions were the fussier ones. Basically, the reproduction ones wanted you to pin it to the outside, fold it in, stitch it down on the inside, and then top stitch it, where the reproduction instructions had you stitch it to the inside, turn it out, iron it down, and then top stitch it. So it was one last step. I wanted to address something really quickly. I haven't used Big 4 patterns in a while, and I knew that there was an issue with plus size patterns, but I didn't realize how bad it was. Like, I have a 26-inch waist. I wear a size 0 in women's clothing. The only size smaller than me is a 00, which is a 24-inch waist. And I am sure that there are women out there with 22-inch waists, but I know for a fact that over half of the women in the United States have over a 34-inch waist. But for some reason, Simplicity decided that they didn't need to make anything over a 34-inch waist. That a 22-inch waist was a better use of their time and their ink and their resources. Like, make it make sense to me. A 22-inch waist is a kid's 7, 8. They'd rather make patterns fit children than fit over half of America's women. That just pisses me off. Well, that's not the direction I expected this video to go when I started it, but I just felt like it needed to be addressed. I'm going to hem these shorts and start working on the skirt. The skirt. The waistband of the skirt was very interesting. The original pattern has a dart on the sides, where the reproduction doesn't. And I really feel like it kind of makes a difference. Like, the skirts are similar sizes, but the original one fits so much better in the waist, and I think that's because the dart kind of takes it out instead of it being straight up and down. I don't know. There's something weird about this reproduction skirt. Also, the original pattern has top stitching at the top of the waistband, where the reproduction doesn't. And so I didn't add top stitching on the reproduction skirt. And I really feel like it shows that it's missing that. It looks so much better with the top stitching. For the skirt, both panels are slightly fuller in the reproduction than they are in the vintage. I mentioned the lack of dart in the reproduction waistband, but also the waistband of the reproduction is slightly less curved and it is longer than the vintage. Instead of doing a regular zipper, I did invisible zippers because I wanted to, because I find invisible zippers to be easier and prettier and I like them. So I did that. The crotch seams of these shorts are slightly different. I'm not too sure it made that big of a difference, but the reproduction is slightly bigger. Same with the back, the curve is a little different and the crotch seam is just a little bit wider. Here's one for the reproduction. The pocket is just slightly larger in the reproduction than it is in the vintage. The belt, pretty much the same on both, except that the reproduction is slightly longer, which is weird because they're both supposed to be the same waist measurement. I'm not too sure the difference in pocket assembly of these shorts really made that big of a difference. The only major thing is that the reproduction had you sew the entire pocket into the seam of the shorts, where the vintage left the bottom of the pocket out of the seam. I think that's what's creating this little pulling on the side of the reproduction shorts, or it might have been my error. I don't know. Honestly, I think the fussier version of creating these pleats in the vintage pattern is the way to go. All I had to do to press these pleats was just iron them all the way down before I pulled out those basting stitches, and it was so easy to do. So I've already talked a little bit about this curve in the front. I really think this is the culprit for why the reproduction does not fit well. As expected, the back of the pattern isn't that different, just the slope of the shoulder and the arm's eye. Is it arm's eye or arm's eye? I've heard it both ways. Tell me in the comments. Am I pronouncing it wrong? Is it arm's eye? Is it arm's eye? The sleeve in the vintage pattern is quite a bit larger than the reproduction one. I really like this vintage pattern sleeve. It gives you just more room to move your arms. I actually made this top pattern a few years ago, and I thought maybe I had actually just made it too small because I had to pin it down to my bra to get it to stay underneath. So I made a larger pattern this time. It didn't seem to make a difference. It still doesn't stay down. So I'll admit something. I don't know how this top is supposed to be worn. The reproduction one is unwearable, just 100% terrible. But the original one's not great either. I don't know what they were thinking when they designed it in 1944. I don't know how it was supposed to be worn in 1944, but I can't figure out how to wear this top without tying it around my bra to anchor it. But even then, if you raise your arms too much, it's gonna just show your bra. So I came up with a hack for it. I went a little rogue. I sewed a casing around the bottom of it to about halfway to the front and then put elastic in it. And so now it at least stays down. That's all I could think of to do, but at least it's wearable now. I feel like if it had tied like straight across, that would be one thing, but it ties upwards. I don't know. This is all I could think of to do. If you know how to wear this top, please let me know, because I can't figure it out. So making these patterns at the same time was actually quite easy because the instructions were very similar, just slight differences. Really, the only thing that I struggled with is the seam allowance, because the reproduction had 5/8 seam allowance and the original had 1/2 inch seam allowance, except on the sides where it was 3/4 seam allowance, and I was always messing it up. So these two patterns are actually not as different as I expected them to be. The shorts pattern is very usable. The skirt pattern, It's okay. I think the top is useless. I just don't think it's a usable top. But again, I don't know if that is exactly the Reproduction's fault, though the original pattern is slightly better. I just don't like the top. I don't know if I can say that enough. I don't like the top. Well, I hope you learned something from this video. Subscribe. Good enough, right? Yeah, good enough.